France, one of the first countries to adopt democracy in the modern history, has also been traditionally the center of power in Europe. The country has witnessed dozens of revolts and protests against the ruling elite. Whether it be the French Revolution of 1789 or the recent countrywide protests, people have always rallied against the rulers whom they deemed unfit to rule, leaving an indelible mark on its society and political landscape. In today's video, we will delve into the 5 of the biggest public protests that have occurred in France in recent times, briefly examining their causes, impacts, and lasting legacies. The recent protest erupted after Nael, a boy of Algerian descent, was shot dead by the French police for allegedly not having a driver's license. This led to widespread chaos and protests all across the country. Cars and public buildings were set on fire and clashes were reported between police and protesters who took to the streets to rally against French authorities' excesses. As per figures from the French Interior Ministry, 427 people were arrested on Friday night, a number lower than the previous days. Since the protests first erupted, over 2,800 people have been arrested, with France deploying around 45,000 police personnel on the streets. French President Emmanuel Macron has appealed for calm amid heavy police deployment. However, the condition does not seem to get any better soon. The May 1968 protests were a watershed moment in French history, representing a cultural and political revolution that challenged the status quo. Sparked initially by students' opposition to traditional education systems, the protests quickly grew to encompass broader issues of workers' rights, capitalism, and societal change. The streets of Paris were flooded with students, workers, and intellectuals demanding a more egalitarian society. That protest, marked by intense clashes with the police, had fueled a nationwide strike that brought the country to a standstill. The movement succeeded in shaking the foundations of the French government and paved the way for significant societal and political changes, including the reform of universities, increased workers' rights, and a transformation of cultural norms. In 1995, France experienced a series of strikes and protests in response to proposed welfare reforms by Prime Minister Alain Juppé. The reforms aimed to reduce the budget deficit and address France's growing welfare state, but they faced vehement opposition from trade unions, workers, and the general public. The protests reached their peak in November 1995 when millions took to the streets across the country. The strikes paralyzed transportation, leading to widespread disruptions, and demonstrated the power of collective action. Ultimately, the Juppé government was forced to backtrack on some of its proposed reforms, highlighting the impact that public pressure can have on policy decisions in France and in any other such country. In 2006, a proposed labor law known as the Contrat Premier Embauche triggered significant protests and unrest, primarily led by students. The CPE would have allowed employers to terminate employees under the age of 26 without cause during a 2-year trial period. Students saw that law as a threat to job security and rallied against it. The protests escalated rapidly, with hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets in cities across entire France. The movement successfully pressured the government into withdrawing the law, marking a significant victory for the student and labor movements. In 2016, the French government under President François Hollande proposed labor reforms known as the Loi Travail, aimed at increasing labor market flexibility and reducing unemployment. However, these reforms faced fierce opposition from trade unions and left-wing groups who believed that they would erode workers' rights. The protests and strikes that followed were marked by clashes with the police and disruptions to transportation and public services. Despite the government making some amendments to the proposed law, the protests continued, highlighting the deep divisions within French society regarding labor reforms. The Yellow Vest movement, which emerged in late 2018, was initially sparked by a proposed fuel tax increase, but quickly transformed into a broader protest against economic inequality and the policies of President Emmanuel Macron. Thousands of people wearing yellow reflective vests took to the streets, often leading to violent clashes with the police. The movement gained widespread attention both domestically and internationally, with protesters demanding greater purchasing power, social justice, and political reforms. Although the movement eventually lost momentum, it succeeded in raising awareness of socio-economic disparities and pushing the government to make concessions such as raising the minimum wage and cancelling the fuel tax hike. Throughout its modern history, France has witnessed numerous public protests that have shaped the nation's political and social landscape. From the May 1968 protests that challenged the establishment to the Yellow Vest movement demanding economic justice, these demonstrations have displayed the power of collective action and civic engagement. The protests, which we discuss right now, underscore the French people's commitment to defending their rights, demanding change, and holding their governments accountable. They have often led to tangible policy changes and have left a lasting impact on French society. As history continues to unfold, it remains to be seen how future protests will shape the nation and its trajectory. This was all in this video. Thank you so much for watching.